Hey kids, Jeff Hawkins from Shake Them Ropes here, and for almost 15 years we have been part of Voices of Wrestling. Myself and Chris Novembrino give a review of that week's news, the lazy river of wrestling criticism of that week's WWE and AEW, and then Vader Club, where we watch something from one of our past, or something we may have missed. Smart, snarky, and sometimes serious, but not always. That's us, and if that's your vibe, we'd love to have you listen to Shake Them Ropes every week on the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network.
Do you like wrestling trivia? Then check out the 5-Star Match Game, the Pro Wrestling Quiz Show. I'm Joe Gagney, and every episode, I grill 3 contestants with 5 rounds of power-packed wrestling trivia. We have over 30 evergreen episodes in the archives covering WWE, AEW, Japan, Mexico, and much, 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 much more. Play along at home and check it out today.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am your host, as always, Jesse Collings, and joining me once again, he is the host of the Warren Hayes Show. He is a frequent guest on the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast, and he is, of course, our Quebec City correspondent. It's Mr. Warren Hayes. Welcome back to the show, Warren.
Merci beaucoup, je suis très content d'être là. Ça me fait plaisir de me joindre à vous, Jesse, aujourd'hui, de la belle ville de Québec.
See, that's the first time I think I've ever actually heard you speak French. So is that would you consider that your native language, or did you like do you think English is your native language?
The first language I spoke as a child was English. I actually, when I started school here, because all the schools around here are all French, I actually started school with an English accent. I could speak a bit of French, but with a substantial accent, and then over the years, just being exposed to people and kids and whatnot around here, I just the English accent disappeared.
So when you went to school, like you went to kindergarten or whatever you guys have up there, like the teacher speaks French the entire time?
Yep, absolutely. Like it's essentially what think of your own classes as you were growing up. But the teacher speaking in the teacher speaking in French, and instead of taking Spanish, well, we take English as a second language here. So I breeze through those. That, like, I had a leg up on everyone. When exam time would come around, like throughout my entire academic history from K-12, right? I was everyone's friend when exam time would come around. And then was time for the English for the English tests. Brother, I was tutoring everyone, even people who hated me asked me for some help, and I did it because I was a sap. You see, but
yeah,
that I at least had one advantage on everyone. And
this is like
those tests.
Yes, we had courses at my high school because I went to a majority Hispanic high school. So we had courses like Spanish for Spanish speakers. So it was kind of like basically like what we would consider English class, like reading and writing text and stuff like that, but focused solely on Spanish. You basically had to take it if you were a native Spanish speaker. So they could make sure those native Spanish speakers weren't getting that easy A like you were doing up in Canada.
It wasn't that developed. And there was, the English speakers in Quebec City back when I was a kid in 1980. Oh my God. Like we all knew each other, like whatever part of the city you were from, there was like 50 of us. Now there's more now, but back then it's like, I was the anomaly. So they hadn't developed like sophisticated, native speaking classes for native speaking English speakers. That's a lot of speaking. They hadn't done anything on that level because we were a rarity, Jesse. I was a gem amongst the coal.
Yeah, I'm certainly jealous of your bilingualism. I recently set out a goal to become fluent in Spanish by the time I turned 35. So I have
Okay, how's that going?
Well, I haven't really, to be honest, I haven't really started yet. It was something I literally thought about last week. I've been thinking about a while, like really taking it seriously. Like I'm gonna like take classes at like the local community college and like um do a lot of like practicing on my own and just like try to like it's just like a little goal I have for myself for like self
Sure.
improvement that I know is going to be difficult. and I'm giving myself, 3 or 4 years to kind of figure it out. And there's no shortage of people that can speak Spanish too. But I'm jealous of anyone that can speak another language, and I want to
Uh,
be
I,
that person.
I mean, I it's cool. I got to be honest, like it's cool because it's never prevented me from doing anything. The fact that I could speak English outside of Quebec, right, kind of thing, and it's something that I did the same thing with my kids. I gave them, I guess, this is going to sound super corny, but the gift of bilingualism. But nonetheless, it's I know they've had opportunities and things happening for them, and an openness to the world that otherwise you don't necessarily have. And I was really happy to be able to give that to them as well. It's tremendous, and quite frankly, I'd like to be trilingual because I would love to speak Spanish. I'd love to. And Spanish is very close to French on top of that, so I know like for me it'd be a fairly easy language to learn because it has the same Latin roots essentially, the Romantic languages, right? Um, so maybe we should do it together. Maybe it should be a common goal. You'd be 35 and I'd be 72. So it's never too late.
65, 68 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my coworkers speaks 5 languages. Um,
Holy smokes,
and
that's
like,
amazing.
yes, and he's very useful. It's kind of like owning a pickup truck. Like, if you own a pickup truck, like everyone asks you to do stuff and help you move, and oh, I got this couch, you gotta help me. That's what my coworker Tony is like. Like oh man, it's because um he speaks English, Italian, Albanian, Spanish, um, and I think French is the other one. Um,
Okay.
but he's translated interviews and stuff that I've done with people, and it's like I'm like, oh, this is so helpful, and I should probably be better at doing this myself.
Big
Um,
curveball on the Albanian there, though. That
well,
sort of
he's
comes
from
out of
Albania,
nowhere.
so he's from
Oh,
Albania, and
okay, okay.
Worcester, the city I cover, it has a pretty large Albanian American population.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so yeah, so he's from Albania, where and Italian is widely spoken in parts of Albania.
Yes.
So yeah, and he also learned English. So he gets the Albanian, the English, and then the Italian. And once you have the Italian, it's fairly easy enough to transition to some of the other Romance languages.
Sure.
Um,
Sure. I'd be
anyway,
interested. I'd be interested if you ever walked up to him and you said to him one day, to me, you're kind of like a pickup truck, just to see what his response would be.
I think I've told him that. That's not the first time I've used that reference before.
But you
Shout
did
out.
add some context, right? It's
Yeah.
not just like, hey, you're kind of like my pickup truck. It's like, what are you trying to say?
He's great. He teases me about my soccer team once a week. He's a great coworker. Shout out Tony Kauji.
Oh,
Um,
there you go. Shout out Tony.
anyway, we're here to talk about a man who, to my knowledge, only speaks one language, although I'm sure he has some um, Hebrew in him. Uh, it's Maxwell Jacob Friedman, who I think has now emerged, Warren, as the definitive lightning rod for AEW. It's a
Hmm.
crown he has battled over since he first came into the company, but has had to fend off such established veterans as Chris Jericho, Cody Rhodes, CM Punk. Um, and there always seems to be at least one guy in AEW that is lightning rod, but I think now he has that position entirely to himself. Um, and I think the genesis of this episode started when I did not watch Forbidden Door live. I watched it about 36 hours after it took place, and
Hmm.
I looked at I didn't look at like a ton of spoilers, but I didn't hide from them either, and I had seen a very common take on social media. And some of the people I follow, and it was specifically talking about the MJF versus Hangman Page match from Forbidden Door, and it said, it was very, very critical of MJF and the sports entertainment shenanigans and everything that happened in that match. And so I was preparing when I sat down to watch the match myself for it to be like a disaster, like this huge momentum killing match that was going to hurt MJF and it was going to hurt Hangman Page, and it was just going to be the complete wrong match for the crowd, and it was going to be just this disaster. And then I watched the match, and while there were definitely some sports entertainment shtick, some of MJF's hallmarks as a performer, as the match was laid out in this kind of grand epic fashion with a couple of run-ins and cheap heel spots and all this kind of stuff. But I watched the match, and after watching it, I was like, I thought that was a pretty good match. And even if you don't think it was like a great match, and I'm not going to argue with anyone that was annoyed with like the foot on the rope spot or the Mark Briscoe stuff, because I can definitely see that throwing people off of the match. At the end of the day, the big picture of that match, what happened? It got a ton of heat from the audience. MJF ended up having to eat a ton of shit at the end. And Hangman Page looked like a super over badass. When Hangman finally hits MJF with the Money in the Bank briefcase or whatever, and dents it, and the crowd loses its shit, and then Hangman pins him. Like that was, I think, a good moment for everyone involved, just from a big picture perspective. Whether or not it was up to individual preference that you enjoyed the match or not, I'm not going to argue with people who had a problem with it. But it made me think about how we were talking about this guy and how we were evaluating this guy, and I think it's kind of gotten out of control. And I have a few reasons for why I think that's the case. But what did you think of that match, and kind of what does it make you think of MJF currently?
So we have different opinions on the match, which is great because it's going to make things spicy. So I will agree with you 100%. Right up until we started to get into the leg on the rope stuff, I thought the match was phenomenal, and there was no question in my mind that the match was going to be great because the Hangman can't have a bad match. And for all the crap that MJF takes, we often seem to forget that MJF is a great big match wrestler, and he always delivers and over delivers in big match spots, no matter what, right? So the match in itself, I was so excited, it was going well. And I really did not like the foot on the rope thing, the Mark Briscoe interference, which didn't really interfere. I don't know what he was supposed to do. I
It
don't know
just
what he
kind of
was doing,
appeared and got hauled away by security.
and
Yes.
got taken away. And I'm like, what are we doing here? Coming back, the Bryce thing, where he's counting to three, like it was all extremely convoluted. And unlike you, I was kind of mad that Hangman used the clipboard to beat MJF. I understand why he did it. Don't get me wrong. I understand the psychology why when it's like
Warren, if you don't
you
like something, it's clearly because you're too stupid to understand why it was good.
yeah, well, there you go. Of course, that's the thing. I mean, I am kind of dumb. Let's be honest. I watch pro wrestling, but the I like this was Hangman's big first pay-per-view defense. I think he should have steamrolled, well, not steamrolled, but he should have had a clear, definite win without the use of shenanigans. I understand why he does it, because the idea is ultimately, look, you've been throwing all this junk at me. You're taunting me with the ring. You're low blowing. You're using your stupid metal clipboard. I'm going to use it against you because I'm fed up of this shit, kind of thing. I understand. Like, the guy is pushed to his wit's end, but he's the hero. He's the top guy. He's he's as much of a clean cut baby face as they a white bread baby face as they have in the company. I think it would have been really awesome if instead he just did what he ended up doing. Hit him with a dead eye, hit him with a buckshot, and that's it. We're done. I don't think the clipboard was necessary to kind of, I don't know. Like, I don't think Max needed to be protected. You know what I mean? Max is great, and Max, it kind of goes along the idea of all the Hangman fans who always think that, oh, Hangman is always in trouble because of his booking, and is like, if there's one guy in the company that will always be okay, it's Hangman. But also Max, also MJF. MJF is always going to be fine in this company. So I wasn't a fan of it, right? and I let that know when I reviewed it over on my channel. But to me, it hasn't necessarily changed how I feel about Max. If that was the question, right? How did that make you feel about Max, right? And I think that was the question. It didn't make me change how I feel about Max because, if anything, it continued to compound an idea, a vision that I have of him, where it's unfortunate that he has to resort to ultra convoluted ways of winning matches, or throwing a wrench to sort of divert away from the natural progression of a match to a wonky finish, when he really doesn't have to. When Max is too talented to have to resort to that. Now, again, I understand why he does it, and I understand the throwback elements, and we'll probably get into that as the conversation moves forward. The throwback elements that MJF represents as a professional wrestling character, I guess, if you want to use those terms. But like, he already has like the gimmicks. He's got the ring. He has the clipboard. He has all of these accoutrements always at his disposal. We don't have to overcomplicate it with booking that removes you from everything we've been trying to say in this match, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
We're touching on what I think is a very commonly held frustration that people have with MJF, which is this guy's got excellent fundamentals, right? He's a really, really good promo. He's got tons of charisma when he's a very good wrestler. He's had some excellent matches, like you said, when he's in a pay-per-view main event or close to a main event. The results are usually really strong from an in-ring perspective. And a lot of even people who really dislike the match said, this match felt like it was on its way to being a great match, and then all the MJF stuff came in and ruined the match. So I think there's a lot of frustration where people recognize his talent and then get annoyed that he's just doing all of this extra stuff because it's part of some storytelling, and everything's got to be this sweeping epic. So we have all this extra stuff that's happening in this match as opposed to a more basic pro wrestling style,
Sure.
which a lot of people want out of AEW, right? They're used to and they're sick of the really convoluted, like Vince Russo era booking of the match. The match against Hangman Page reminded me a lot of the Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Dude Love match from, I think it was Over the Edge, 1998. It was one of Austin's first like title defenses once he won the championship after WrestleMania 14. And they had the whole thing where like I think Vince was the special guest referee, and like Pat Patterson was a special ring announcer, and Gerald Briscoe was the special timekeeper, and it was like
Sure.
this whole idea where it's like this whole thing to kind of
stack the deck against Austin,
right.
basically.
And so there was this, and then Austin overcomes the odds and wins, and everyone, and it was like really, really overbooked. Like obviously it's Russo era WWF, so it's like all these guys running in and interference and all this kind of stuff like that. And I enjoy that match just like I enjoy Hangman Page versus MJF. But I also understand that is kind of like a style of wrestling that people really don't want to see in like the AEW world title. And I think in it, MJF is viewed, correctly so, as the main influence in triggering that style. And I think the frustration comes from this is a guy who's really talented that doesn't need to do all this extra stuff, yet for whatever reason he does because that's what he wants to do. And there's an annoyance that's like, oh, well, Tony's got to reel him in. Tony's got to be the one that tells him not to do all this stuff. And it's like, maybe Tony likes that stuff. Like,
Look, that's the thing, and look, it's something that I think a lot of fans have to start coming around to. I think it's easy to pin the blame on Max because we hear all the rumors that he has all this influence, and that
just like how Chris Jericho and Cody Rhodes and CM Punk had all this influence too. This is the
exactly
trend among AEW fans.
Isn't that interesting? And he's got all this influence, and I don't doubt that he does. But ultimately, like, there's one guy who decides what goes on television every week, or on the pay-per-views, and it's not MJF, because he doesn't have creative control. I know people would love to find out in his contract that he has a Hogan style creative control clause in it, but he doesn't. The one guy who decides what happens on his shows is Tony Khan, and Tony Khan has to start taking a lot of brunt for these decisions that fans are displeased with. Because
That some fans are displeased with. Some fans are displeased with. Because
yes,
the fans at the O2 Arena didn't seem displeased by that match.
Okay, sure, I'll grant you that. Look, it's Mid-South Tony, right? So he's going to have some sensibilities towards having MJF act like an old school cheating shit heel, right? He has these sensibilities, and I'm sure Tony goes along with, here's the thing. If MJF comes and pitches an idea, right? He's gonna try and get what he wants, right? You're going to pitch as wide an idea as possible, so that even if it gets whittled down, even if it gets edited down a little bit, it's still something you want to do, right? That's just basic negotiations. You shoot for the ideal, for something bigger than what you actually want, right?
Sure.
So ultimately, if he's negotiating with Tony Khan and his ideas, and Tony is essentially, I don't know how it's going, taking them as is or just providing a few tweaks, ultimately, it's Tony who's giving his okay on it or not. And that's the one thing that I think everyone needs to be more cognizant of, is that ultimately MJF is a talent. He's a special talent in the company. Don't get me wrong. He's not one of the gates of agony, no disrespect, but he has a little more, he has a little more sway than they do. And he's a top guy. So he gets, top guy treatment, whatever way, preferential treatment in whichever way that comes across, of course. But it's still one guy who decides what happens and how his matches go out and how his TV turns out. And that's Tony Khan. And I don't blame MJF for going in and pitching all of these ideas, as big and outlandish or whatever as they are. I don't know. Like, I'm not there, but I don't blame him for doing that. I blame the boss for not whittling them down to something where it's like, Max, this is where your strengths are at. This is what we should be doing instead, kind of thing.
Yes, it's a sentiment that I express frequently on this show, which is that Tony deserves ultimately like a bulk of the credit and the bulk of the blame for whatever happens in AEW because of his position. He's in and should be in complete control of what happens on those shows.
Sure.
I think in terms of MJF, like, we have to go back to his babyface, his ill-fated babyface run in 2023 to kind of, I think, get to like a big part of this discussion, which is the Bro Chacho stuff with Adam Cole, and basically everything between MJF and Adam Cole displeasing a segment of AEW fans because it was so WWE coded, with the wacky backstage segments and we're two guys and we're like really going to be over the top best friends. We started as enemies and now we're like best friends, and just kind of like this really hacky angle, which for a brief period of time seemed really over, to the degree it looked like when they had that match at All In 2023 at Wembley Stadium, it seemed like the logical conclusion to that match was going to be one of them turning on the other, but because they were getting such good reactions, they decided to milk it for a little bit longer. That's at least my impression of what ended up happening. And the whole thing gets compounded by the eventual payoff, which is Adam Cole turning on MJF, is totally like destroyed by Adam Cole suffering what ended up being a really significant ankle injury. And they basically had to write off the entire angle when Adam Cole did eventually return. And it was a disaster. That's in hindsight, it's a disaster because it was a storyline that a lot of fans didn't like and thought really negatively represented a lot of things about AEW that they didn't care for, and then also never had any payoff and awkwardly positioned MJF, who is so clearly a natural heel, into a babyface role. And only until really this year, 2025, MJF has kind of gotten back on track, I think, in the right kind of role he's supposed to be in. But that whole run in 2023 has left a bad taste in a lot of fans' mouth. There
I agree.
wasn't a ton of, I think, negative sentiment towards MJF until that whole angle and run happened in 2023.
I agree. I
There
think
was
there's a lot of
definitely, yeah, there was criticism of him in certain things, and it wasn't super surprising that his that kind of, he had this babyface run, it kind of worked out that way. But that's really what we're talking about, I think, when people are talking about how frustrated they are and how unhappy they are with MJF's performances. I think a lot of that stems back to that run in like the second half of 2023.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of PTSD that still exists in a certain amount of fans in that regard, and I think it's kind of spread through past that. Yeah, and it's the same thing with you were talking about Vince Russo booking just a few moments ago, and I think maybe for older fans like myself, that's also part of the PTSD aspect where it's like we don't want this to come back. We had to suffer through this, and we never ever ever want to live through this type of era of pro wrestling ever again. So there's a lot of I think there's a lot of gut reactions that come through that. But yeah, look, the brochacho stuff was, I think what it served ultimately is that it established a lot of the narrative that exists today. And that is that MJF, has his ideas, and essentially Tony is on board with them, and he gets to do whatever he wants because it's MJF, because he's a top guy. And MJF gets to do whatever he wants. And I think that's where the narrative comes from. And I think it's compounded more, even harsher, because it broke so harshly from the tone that AEW had established for itself. And I don't want to say a serious wrestling promotion or a sports based, they had sort of fiddled with that concept a bit at the start, but didn't quite work out that way. But AEW was still perceived as the promotion that was supposed to be the alternative to WWE. And here we were, like you said, watching backstage skits and doing bad jokes at restaurants about Italian food or whatever. And you're like, okay, what is it that I'm watching? I'm supposed to be watching AEW because I can't stand the other place. So I don't want the other place trickling in here. Otherwise, what's the point?
And this was involving like the main world title program too.
And it was, I don't think anyone would have had half the issue with it if it was a nice little mid-card act, where you've got MJF doing the babyface thing and doing his best pal shtick and fishing Paul White out of the ocean and whatnot. I don't think people would have half the issue that they did having with it if it had been just a nice little mid-card act. But that's it. It was the main event thing. And like I feel like we kind of run in the same circles, Jesse, right? I feel like my tolerance for nonsense, when I say nonsense, like, skits and character work and stuff like that, I feel my tolerance for that is higher than a lot of people that we hang out with. As long as it doesn't impact matches, like the wrestling itself, I really don't have an issue with it. So, like, I'll give you a good example. The Timeless Tony Storm stuff, when it started, I hated it, Jesse, because she was doing shtick. She was doing stuff with her shoes. She was doing nonsense with Luther. And I'm like, this sucks because it's Toni Storm and she's a great pro wrestler. But now the gimmick is getting in the way of her having great wrestling matches. Now she's found that balance between the shtick and wrestling. And I have zero issues with the timeless gimmick now. Like zero, because ultimately we get wrestling. We get good high-level wrestling by Toni Storm, who's one of the world's best women's wrestlers, right? So that ultimately was my issue with the brochacho stuff. And a lot of times what annoys me with Max is that the nonsense gets in the way of just delivering a good, solid professional wrestling match. And that's where oftentimes I draw the line. And I think there's a difference between nonsense and a heel doing heel things to win. Like pulling out the diamond ring and stuff like that, I think that's fine. Like if the vision that Tony has for MJF is to be this shit heel, modeled off, old-timey Mid-South territory stuff, I get it. And I think it's great, actually. Because most of the time, most of the time, if he wins a match because he clocks the baby face across the face with a ring, well, it protects the baby face to a degree, right? It also protects the baby face because the heel had to resort to cheating to beat him. And that's, it's kind of a winning situation for everyone. But
you mentioned something. You mentioned PTSD, right?
Sure.
Like if MJF gets back involved in the title program, he's going to be like what he was in 2023. And there was definitely glimmers of that in the Hangman Page program, with the Mark Briscoe being set on fire, potentially being set on fire, and the whole, stipulation regarding him not giving in his I don't even know what they call it.
Gimmick.
Yeah, what do they even call it?
The contract execution. I don't know.
Yeah,
whatever it is.
And that whole thing has been a mess because then they basically backtracked and said, well, now you got to give a week in advance notice.
Yeah, it's just...
And the whole point of the entire angle from a creative perspective was that Max could cash in at any time. And the fact that he lost that privilege to then got it back because of the Mark Briscoe angle. And it was just the whole thing was just a mess. And that is Tony Khan's fault. I don't even think that's on Max, because I don't think Max would want to do it like that. It just has to do with different ideas and Tony probably changing his mind on what they wanted to do. But, in the grand scheme of things, it's bad but small, right? We can move on from that. Stupid angle, but whatever. It's not going to sink the company.
Here's the thing, though. Here's one thing, since you brought it up, people getting the PTSD, of him being involved in the Hangman angle, right? I think that's one thing. But I think and that the PTSD crowd, which I include myself in, right? I think that's a certain proportion of the crowd. But I think one of the reasons it's gotten really, really loud recently is because he's feuding with Hangman, Jesse. And Hangman, I don't know if you know, has a pretty loud fan base. I don't know if you know this. I don't know if you've come across this online, but you got to be careful of the Hangman and what you talk about online in regards to the Hangman. And you probably saw the very deep anxiety that the Hangman fan base felt, through the Owen Hart Foundation tournament, and then all the anxiety leading into All In. Is he going to win? Is he going to lose? He's got to win, and all that. Now it's like, okay, now he's champion, and now he's saddled with MJF, who's going to come in and ruin everything for the Hangman, for the precious Hangman. And I think I think this is one of the reasons why the vitriol, I guess, that's being hurled at MJF is more significant than ever. It's because he has been saddled with the Hangman. Again, if he was in the mid card doing having a feud with Adam Copeland, if he was having a feud with even with Swerve, you wouldn't be having these types of reactions. But it's not just because of the world title situation. It's because it's Hangman Adam Page, and his fans are extremely protective of him.
Yeah,
And
I
and
think it's
and
definitely like the Hangman fans are kind of like a multiplier, right? Um, but I think it extends far beyond that in the sense of AEW fans in general are an anxious bunch. And
yes,
since the
yes.
company has been first announced, they have always had this deep lying fear that something is going to happen that is going to ruin the company or make the
Mm-hmm.
company go out of business or destroy AEW. And that panic manifests itself in a lot of different ways. It's manifested itself with being concerned about, television ratings and attendance
Yes.
drops and whenever you see the line go up, line go
The
down, people react.
the
Um,
media deal, the media deal.
the media,
You
oh, the
know,
next TV deal, concern about WWE and WWE, rating talent potentially, WWE running shows head to head, all that kind of stuff manifests itself there. And it also really manifests itself in the idea that there are certain powerful individual talents that have been a part of AEW that are going to ruin AEW in some
mm-hmm.
way. And for, a while it was, there was a period where it was Cody Rhodes. For a while it was Chris Jericho. CM Punk definitely, especially towards the end of his tenure in AEW, was, CM Punk was going to ruin AEW. And
Oh
he
yeah.
he did try in that case. And now it's MJF, and it's going to be somebody that is going to get involved, and because they're a big star, and because Tony caters to these guys a lot, they are going to, ruin AEW with their bad ideas. And working with Hangman Page is obviously not good. That's kind of like I said, a multiplier because you already have
Yes.
the smaller segment of big Hangman Page fans who are kind of naturally suspicious of Hangman not getting a fair shake of things. Um, so you have that involved, but I think there's just an overwhelming sense from the fan base that something's going to happen to AEW that's going to ruin it, whether that is from a business perspective or that what it is from a quality perspective. And one of the biggest threats is, oh, they're going to build the company around somebody whose act I do not care for. Um, and MJF, I think, is a little bit more complicated because I think a lot of people will say it makes sense to push MJF. He's a very talented guy. I enjoy a lot of what he does, but he's just got this 10, this 15, this 20% of him that needs to be prevented from manifesting itself on screen, and that isn't always the case.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that it like MJF is an easy target because of how much he has embraced being a heel? Like, I think he's sort of softened on being constantly in kayfabe, I guess. For early on in AEW, like that was the thing, is like he's never out of character. He's always the bad guy all the time.
I think the
Now some
fact, yeah, I think
sometimes now he's a little softer on that. But do you think that contributes? Because sometimes I feel that it does. Just really quickly, I'll leave you have your thoughts because it is your show after all. But because I think that a lot of fans they don't want to be worked. Like they want to be in on the joke, and they don't want to be worked. They want to know that the person that is a heel is not necessarily nasty all the time, or whatever. They want to be able to see like the softer side of that person, the human behind it, even though they play a bad guy on TV. And that's not what Max wants to do. Creatively, he wants to do something else. He wants to be that throwback, which a lot of fans, the significant amount of fans thought was spectacular at first. Yeah, like I kind of feel like. Well, what do you think? I kind of feel it's part of the reason why he's so easy. He's an easy target.
I think the fact that he is a heel, like, does make it a little bit easier. I mean, today is a good example. I saw something today, and it was, um, Did you see this Ronda Rousey? I guess was on a podcast, and she said something
Yes.
along the lines of she was no like saying she didn't understand why WWE programmed her with Alexa Bliss. Instead, it was only they just went with the decision because Alexa Bliss was their top merch seller, and it
Sure.
didn't make any sense for her character or whatever. And MJF responded or quote tweeted something about that, and he said something along the lines of like, this is of course this is a wrestling business. It's not,
Right.
like basically saying like uh the WWE did the right thing because they were focused on what business is, and that's what this is. It's a business, and some
Yeah.
people don't understand that. And like people were like getting mad. Oh, of course MJF said that. Like, oh, MJF, of course he thinks that. Like, what a loser. Of course this dweeb's got to weigh in. And it's like he's clearly being a heel. It's MJF's Twitter account, okay? You're not getting the deep inside, thoughts of Max, the person. This is Max the character you're getting. But people are susceptible to that, I guess, because he's clearly a villain on TV, and um people, he's got real heat. He's got that real heat, Warren.
Right. No, I think that's part of it. I don't want to say that he brings it on himself. Really not. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm. I think that. I think that the look. You hear it sometimes, and it's kind of a cliche, but it's also true. Sometimes the old works the new work. Where ultimately he's going around being a heel all the time. He's just being a bad guy all the time. And people just can't seem to separate fact from fiction. Like there's no way
Well, some
MJ.
people, their reactions to these individuals are really, emotionally driven, right? That when we talk
Sure,
about that fear of AEW being ruined in some perspective, that is a strong emotional reaction people are having to something that they care deeply about, which is AEW.
sure.
And when that happens, you get like these kind of like, I don't want to say illogical reactions because there's actually a lot of logic that goes into them, but these things that it's like, can we take a step back? This is a fake television show, and these are
Sure.
characters.
Yeah. It's like when MJF cut, when he cuts his edgy promos, right? Like when he cut that one promo, the one promo he cut a couple of years ago when the one about the car crash and the with his passenger being a girl was giving him fellatio,
Mhm.
and then he switched places with her, right? And people um actually reached out to police stations to find out if it was real. I'm like, people, like it's a work of
Yeah, if
fiction.
you were
Like
watching Law and Order, you wouldn't like, oh my God, there's a crime I'm seeing. Let me call the police department.
exactly. And isn't that fascinating that wrestling is still able to do that
Well, it's able to
to
do that because there's
people?
a lot of stupid people that watch wrestling.
Hey, oi, there wasn't many brilliant people back in 1979 either, is my point. Like, it's still fascinating that despite the fact that the business has been exposed for decades at this point, it's not recent. It's not like 3 years ago that we figured out that wrestling's a work, right? Vince McMahon went on TV and told us that it was a work. Uh, like the business has been properly exposed for decades, and yet we there the lines still manage to be blurred. Now, I personally would give credit to Max in this situation because he's clearly doing a great job at blurring that line, at making people believe that he's a shit heel, that he's a bad person, that you need to boo this man because they're calling police stations to make sure whether or not this story was real or not. So kudos to him. I think that the counter of that is that, like you said, there's a bunch of stupid people right now who can't make the difference and don't understand that he's portraying, he's doing something creatively doing something different, and they can't figure it out. And I think that amplifies. We were talking about multipliers. We're talking about the Hangman multiplier. Let's talk about the MJF doing great heel work overall multiplier. I think that's adding to the fire as well. Look, how many times before MJF became mainstream, okay, before AEW, in the years, how many people have lamented, oh, no one does, kayfabe is dead. What a shame, heel wrestlers go on Twitter and they're thanking fans, and the Rusev Lana marriage and all that stuff, and people, oh, they're breaking kayfabe. If only people would do kayfabe again, and then you have a guy who does it, and no one can stand him for it, like. It even goes to question, like, what do people actually want out of their pro wrestlers? What do they want? And I think ultimately it's just they want to know. They want to know because they can't imagine it themselves. They want to know that this person is playing a character on TV and is not like this all the time. But Max,
yeah, I mean that's a point that Joe Lambs has raised a lot, which is like a lot of wrestling fans, they don't seem to want like actually unlikable heels. They want like over the top cartoon heels that are winking to the camera.
but I mean, how how is Max not being cartoonish? Like
Yes, to
he's
a degree,
being
he's too cartoonish.
exactly, and he's like, even when he's trying to be edgy, like you're like, brother, you're saying you're using lines that exist only in 1996. Like even the stuff that he does has this tinge of unseriousness about it because it's so because it didn't age well. I chuckle every time where people say, "Oh, you shouldn't have said that. That didn't age well," and I'm like, of course, because Max doesn't care because he's supposed to be an edgelord and be out of touch on that level. Because you're not supposed to like him. That's the whole point.
I think I want to go back to like his run as champion in 2023 and the babyface angle and all that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of people will look back as like especially the back half of 2023 as like the nadir of AEW over the course of its history in terms of from a quality perspective.
Mm.
Um, there was a lot of issues and it created this, whole like kind of like counter revolution that the company kind of awkwardly tried to present with like restore the feeling and like, yeah, we're gonna get
Yep.
back to the way things were. They had to almost market it like that because there had been some reputation damage that had been done to the company that I think the company has emerged out of in 2025. Although a few more MJF main events might send us back spiraling downwards, which is what people are worried about. And I think a lot of people, what is what is one of the defining things of 2023, that nadir? Well, MJF was champion and he was doing the babyface thing, and there was a stupid devil angle with Adam Cole that we never got any payoff for because Adam Cole got hurt, and it was just very bad. And everyone in MJF's title reign is kind of like the definitive moment of the bottom of AEW's quality over the course of its existence. And I think, if we go back to 23, there are a lot of other factors that hurt the company, besides Max's babyface run, which I'm not going to defend. It did not go well. But it was obviously the same day as his all in match with um MJF. With Adam Cole, you have the Samoa Joe, or you have the CM Punk Jack Perry incident, and CM Punk getting fired from the company.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the kind of the suspensions to the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, and that actually, sorry, that was a year before with All Out. But um, you basically have that whole CM Punk firing and that whole thing unfolding at the same time as this MJF babyface title run. We saw there's key injuries to some other key talent, and it was a really hard time for AEW for a variety of reasons.
It
And
was
I
very
don't
exhausting.
Yeah,
It was very
and
exhausting.
I'm not making excuses for Max's performance over that time period because it wasn't the quality it needed to be at. But I think when we look back at it, like, oh yeah, remember when MJF was champion? Those were terrible times, and they were. But it wasn't solely because MJF was champion. There was a lot of negative things that were going on for AEW at that time period. But I think a lot when we're looking back on it in hindsight, I think it's easy to just kind of put a lot of that blame or any business downturn on MJF and not on and kind of ignore some of the other factors that were going on at that time period. And I think that hurts his reputation.
Sure. I think he will get a lot of blame for that period. But oh man, it's a tricky one, right? Because you know, and I say this as someone who really I really like MJF, and I just do. I like him a lot, but I have difficulty not disassociating him with the loss of viewership that happened in that time, with the loss of live attendance, dropping, right? Not the loss of live attendance, but live attendance dropping in that period. How much was it because CM Punk just wasn't around anymore and he wasn't showing up? I think there's data that shows that when CM Punk did started making his returns, with Collision and showing back at shows, showing back up at shows, wasn't necessarily moving the needle either. Like, wasn't the big saving grace either. Yeah, look, it's unfortunate, but when you look back at the at any period in history when a promotion is doing well or not, one of the things is that you're going to point to is who was champion and whether it's good or not, right? That's why Kevin Nash is in the position he is, as being a guy who completely, who never was a draw, who was a complete failure as a world champion when he was in WWE and in WCW as well, being champion during some of the worst eras of both promotions, right? Um, and yeah, I have trouble disassociating. So of course you're going to go back and look at MJF in this period and say, well, he was champ. This was despite everything that was going on back, in the back, which was huge. Don't get me wrong. They decided to go with this angle that clearly didn't turn the tides either. It didn't make things more compelling. It just ended up being what it was. And the thing that I will defend Max on here is that it's essentially the same thing as what we were talking about earlier, is that all of these ideas that came through were all stamped and approved, and ultimately were okayed by the people that he was working with as well. This was all okayed with Adam Cole as well, and whatever opponents, whatever little angles they had along the way. Everyone sort of meshed around this and thought it was okay. And ultimately, Tony Khan decided that this was okay as well. Like, while my company is in turmoil with with the biggest drawing star in the company, this is what we're going to run with. It was a hell of a decision. And I don't, and was it the sole reason why that period was bad for AEW? No, but it was a contributing factor, because it didn't make things, it took us 2 years to get out of this situation, because I agree with you saying that in 2025, AEW has sort of found its footing again. It took 2 years to get out of that.
Do you think the company would be better off if MJF wasn't in it right now?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
I think it's an interesting, I think it's an interesting question because, I would say no, but I will say that you could like he is not necessary for the company to be interesting or strong. You could replace his TV time and his push with another wrestler, and that
I don't
person
know.
would probably be pretty good.
Who? Okay, let's play the game. Who?
Like, I
Who?
don't know, Kyle Fletcher.
No, Kyle Fletcher doesn't have that energy. It's not the same type. It's not, and again, I love Kyle Fletcher, and I think he's tremendous, and we're on the cusp of something truly great with that kid. But he's not the same type of energy. He's not the same type of worker.
I'm not saying he has to be like exactly like MJF. I'm just saying that you have enough people on your roster to, I think, where losing MJF would not be like a critical blow to the company. And so if that's the case, do some of the negatives that he brings to the table, like this fan anxiety, like these bad instincts, like this concern that he doesn't quite understand what AEW should be in a lot of fans' eyes, um, is that worth, the value that he does bring to the table? I think a lot of people would say, "Oh, I wish he went to WWE. The company would,
Yeah.
I would enjoy the company more if he did not." I wouldn't. I wouldn't be one of those people, but I think there's a lot of people that would say that. They're like, I'm kind of tired of this guy. And I think if you were to poll, hardcore AEW fans, and let's give them like five people. Let's say it's like I'll just throw this. It's Hangman, it's MJF, it's Swerve, it's Will Ospreay, and it's Kenny Omega. And you
Oh,
say,
okay.
so I'm just saying, like I'm thinking of like real,
Sure.
real top talents in AEW. Like, okay, which if AEW has to let one of these guys go, which one would you want to see let go? I think a vast, vast majority of them would choose MJF.
Okay. In that perspective, I would agree with you. Yes.
And that's like kind of
Yes.
like I know that's like a hypothetical. I guess my point is that if you look at like the top guys in AEW, he is not seen as essential by I think a lot of fans, and I think the reason for that is because he is much more of a mixed bag than a guy like Swerve or a guy like Hangman would be. Um, and his ceiling as a performer might be higher than any of those guys. And his ceiling as a wrestling star could be higher than any of those guys. But there's just these issues that I think a lot of fans have with his performance and have concerns over him over the long term, um, that have will lead people to think like, this company doesn't really need him and they might be better off without him.
So the interesting thing that you pointed out uh, in your five choices, right, is that the majority of them are baby faces, right?
Correct.
And you do need these top foils, right? You do need top heels in this company to make this to make the baby faces interesting. That's inevitable. And I think that's inherently where Max's value is. And on top of that, like you said, I think his ceiling is higher than I think his ceiling is higher than Swerve. And again, these are all people I really like. These are all wrestlers I really
Yes, we're
really like,
talking
right?
about like the most talented wrestlers in the world for the
Right.
most part.
And I think his ceiling is higher than Swerve. Kenny is a legend. He's great. We all love Kenny Omega, but brother, this ain't 2017 Kenny Omega anymore. If you know, he's banged up, and I don't know if he can reach the heights that he can anymore. Look, he spent the better part of spring and summer in tag teams and multi-man matches, right? Because he's probably not in that kind of shape anymore.
He's dead now, according to after that beatdown on the callus man you put on him last night.
Apparently he's dead. Yes, according to Kyle Fletcher, he's dead. And Max is still in his 20s. Swerve is he's advancing into the 30s, mid 30s if I'm not mistaken. And doesn't he have a target to want to retire within 5 years or something?
Oh, well, every
Right?
single wrestler that's in their 30s says that they're gonna, oh yeah, I definitely don't want to be doing this when I'm 40.
True. But,
Every
he's been
every single wrestler says that. You want to know what happens
but
though? These guys turn 40 and they end up making more money than they ever have in their entire lives, and they keep doing it.
true. That's very true. Um, why would you consider getting rid of a young talent that is nothing but that is nothing but talent, a great in-ring performer. And that has still, it's crazy. He's still a fountain of potential still. Even though we feel like we've seen everything with MJF, he still has, I feel, so much to give. Why would you want to get rid of him? Why would you dump him out of your company? Because you feel like he's a liability, because his promos are too long, the match structures suck and whatnot. So let's flip this around then. I'm Tony Khan, and I'm cognizant of these things, right? I'm looking towards the future. I see MJF as the future. I hear the fan response. What can I do as a promoter to streamline what Max should be doing so that we're not losing the plot here? So that Max doesn't go off on his grandest, craziest theories, right? Not theories, fables, stories, epics. And I can keep them streamlined so that when he does come out, it's effective, it's good to great. People are excited to see him. This should be on the promotion. This should be on Tony Khan once again to have a plan for his talent, especially a young talent, on which he himself has said that this company, can hinge on, outside of the 4 pillar stuff, MJF is absolutely a guy that he sees in the plans of the future for the company. MJF can still work for this company for the next 25 years if he wants to, right?
Yeah. I want to say, I guess we're operating this conversation under the assumption that MJF's instincts are like MJF doing this kind of like WWE extra stuff is inherently wrong. And while I don't enjoy it, I'm not sure it's just like this awful, awful thing that you need to correct. Otherwise, like, he's never going to make it, or like the company will never succeed as much.
I agree. Because look, you even mentioned it, right? The angle in the O2, you've got 19,000 people there at Forbidden Door, and they're going crazy. The angle worked. I'm at home, I got my arms crossed over my chest, and I'm being a big old 50-year-old curmudgeon, right? Well, who am I? Yeah. Or maybe there's 1,200 people.
You lost 18 years from earlier in this podcast.
Time is wibbly wobbly. What do you want from me? But it's like, and maybe 1,200 people on Twitter got upset about it. I got on my podcast and screamed about it. Joe and Rich got on their instant reaction and screamed about it. But ultimately, the boss, MJF, they're going to look at this and they're going to say, well, you know what? This worked out. And maybe the idea here, maybe the frustration ultimately might exist with Max in as such that, he, on his end, it's like, why are these constantly online people always shitting on me when I get into the buildings and I get great reactions? Things are going well. Max has been shown to be a draw ratings wise, multiple times throughout his tenure. Sure. Okay. Maybe he's a little strategic with the quarter hours in which he partakes in. That's fine. That's a whole other discussion. But, nonetheless, are there really signs from a business perspective that MJF is a detriment? Well, I think he has the potential to be, because I think he was part of the decline in business in 2023. I think him being at the top is.
Can we just blame Adam Cole for that?
But we could also. Well, look, I mean, you're joking. Okay, you're joking.
Yeah, I'm far from it.
Well, I mean,
serious.
But there's also it takes 2 to tango in every one of these situations. And I'm just throwing this out there. Who's to say that the finish to the Forbidden Door match, who's to say it wasn't Hangman's idea? I'm not saying it was. I'm just saying, what if it was Hangman's idea? And everyone's like, okay, and the boss says, yeah, we're gonna do that. Like, is it odd to to concede or to conceive? Sorry, is it odd to conceive that MJF just might be a guy who does what his boss wants him to do, right? That ultimately might just be a guy where he's like, they're coming up with the idea, and Hangman has this idea with Mark Briscoe and and whatnot, and Tony goes, love it, and MJF is like, oh, all right, if you guys are into it, we're gonna do it, kind of thing. Would it be that? How is that difficult to why would it be that difficult to assume? Is it because that in the perception, the public perception, these roles cannot be reversed? Hangman, the pure Hangman, that everyone's champion. He posts about the weeds in his yard. He's such an affable, lovable guy. He cannot have bad ideas. That's MJF because he's the
That
crooked.
he portrays an arrogant, very arrogant character on television, and therefore he must be at least a little arrogant in real life.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, again, I'm not saying that these were, that this is the thing. I'm just saying, would MJF is never alone in these situations, and a lot of the times, the people that he's wrestling with, that he's performing with, they have egos too. So, I can't. I'm not saying it's simple, but I do think that it's unfair that he gets unloaded so much on all of this, for all of the bad ideas that come up. Sure, okay, there's a trend line. There's that, you like, if you do a little investigating, you can say, well, all the bad ideas that people really hate, somehow they always involve MJF. So you can make a correlation there. You can say, oh well, there's at least one consistent element we can point to here. But I also think it's unfair that he always gets unloaded on this, and never, ever, ever any blame, any responsibility, at the very least. Maybe not blame, but responsibility is ever levied onto the other performer, or even worse yet, Tony Khan, the boss, who was putting all of this on TV.
You think MJF's skill sets, um, being a very good promo guy, being a guy that from the very beginning was like cutting long in-ring promos for the most part, um, and being very good at playing a character, a very, distinct wrestling character. Um, because that's so similar to what WWE would utilize in its roster. Um, and he's always, been unflatteringly compared to The Miz. Um, and I
Yeah.
think, they're completely different performers in
Mm-hmm.
almost every way.
Yes.
Um, but it's kind of an easy comp to make if you wanted to do some MJF bashing. But do you think that kind of works against him in a lot of ways because he's like very like you look at okay, let's look at Moxley and let's look at Hangman and let's look at Swerve and let's look at especially guys like Danielson and Punk when they were in AEW and how different they were than their WWE characters in a lot of ways. Like MJF, because his skill set feels more in line with what you would see on WWE television, that works against just kind of naturally works against him and has makes some fans kind of feel acrimonious towards him because it's like, oh, he's kind of like a WWE character in AEW. And I don't think that's really necessarily fair, but I understand why fans feel that way because he
Mm-hmm.
is getting in the ring and cutting a 10-minute heel promo. And that is something that you wouldn't see a lot of people in AEW do, but you see it a lot in WWE. Um, and he does, he's definitely doing some of these, convoluted storyline stipulations, which is something you would see uh not necessarily in this current era of WWE, but certainly in eras past. Um,
Sure.
I just think part of it is like his skills are like kind of a natural fit for what people expect from WWE, and in some ways that works against him with the AEW audience.
And well, yes, okay. To answer your question, yes, I agree.
Like
And
if you were to ask a bunch of WWE fans, oh, you guys can get one wrestler from AEW, who would you want? They would say MJF.
probably they probably see him as the as a superstar, which is rightfully so. But they probably see it for different reasons than you and I see him as a superstar. But nonetheless, to answer your question, yeah, I mean, he himself like has often, he's often quoted like his influences and how like he grew up watching WWE like in its in its most WWE vision, right? So these are all his influences. He throws back to all the stuff that he's seen. He wants to do homages to everything that he grew up doing, watching, I should say. That's his composition, right? I mean, he did a song and dance number with Chris Jericho, right? You remember that? I mean, that's exactly the thing. You would assume that this would help. What's the word I'm looking for? Endear him as a heel. It's not necessarily, maybe not endear, but it would help. It would help him be over as a heel because people would maybe understand what he's doing, seeing what he's doing. What you're doing here has no place. Not unlike the inner circle. No, the Jericho Appreciation Society, excuse me, which was, they were sports entertainers and all of that stuff, right? Um, where they were making fun of WWE stuff and whatnot. I kind of think that look, at the very least, you'd think that people would be able to see through that. But then again, like you said, he gets into the ring, he cuts 10-minute promos. So he's taking time away to get this act across, which is then cutting time off of TV for other wrestlers that maybe these people are truly that fans are tuning into. You want to maybe see more of Kenny Omega. These days, you want to see more of the Hangman. Maybe you want to see more Brodido, so on and so forth. You want to see you're by trying to get this act over, he's taking time away from other acts in the company. But then you can flip this around and say, well, if his 10-minute segment is drawing, then why wouldn't we continue? I've never heard an instance, Jesse, and I could be wrong, but I've never heard of an instance of MJF being compared to ratings death. I've never heard that. I feel like I feel like at the very least he's consistent, and at best he at best he pops quarter hours. So
I mean, my days of analyzing quarter hours are behind me. But yeah, I mean, he's not anti-draw in the sense that it's more of the broader message of what is pushing MJF say about AEW. It's and in a lot of ways, it's saying we want AEW is going to be kind of like WWE, and a lot of people don't like that for understandable reasons.
yes,
You mentioned earlier about the potential of MJF and that he still has a lot of untapped potential. And I think because he has, been so good and has achieved so much at an early age of his career, I do think that, if we talk about like his match against Hangman at Forbidden Door, say you really didn't like that match because there was just this extra stuff in it that you didn't feel like was necessary. It wouldn't be surprising at all if MJF kind of grows out of that and matures and gets better. Far he would certainly not be the first wrestler to kind of grow out of some bad habits that
sure.
he had in his 20s and achieve more in his 30s. And he's still very much a work in progress. He's so good and so polished really since day one in AEW when he's 24 years old. Um, that it's kind of hard to put in perspective like, hey, this is a guy that still has a lot more of a ceiling to go upwards. And I think like long term, if you're thinking about MJF as a prospect, which we don't really think about anymore because of how heavily he's been pushed over the last few years,
How established it is, yeah.
yeah, that there's still more to have, more to come.
Yeah. I think it's something that I see I'm glad you brought that up because sometimes I think about it where it's like, well, maybe he's going to grow out of this. You know, right now, you know, immense success and he's emulating all of his heroes. You know, he's doing the Roddy Piper shtick. He's doing the Ric Flair shtick. You know, he's emulating all the guys that he's idolized. And at some point, I think it just comes around naturally where as someone as a wrestler, but as someone who has creative endeavors, I think they're going to. I think they want to find their own voice at some point, and I think that's going to be the case with Max. I think Max is too smart to not realize that at some point he's just going to have to try something else, or he is going to just be redundant and will have nothing new to offer. And look, I think that he has, when I say he has this untapped potential, when he cuts his very angry promos, when he becomes really unhinged and there's no smirk and there's no he's not trying to come up with cute nicknames when he's talking to the other guy or addressing him. When he's just like unhinged and angry, he is at his best in these circumstances. He's just staring straight down the barrel of the camera, and I believe every word he says. And because he's really, really good at it. And I think at some point, like any character in a work of fiction, a character has to evolve. It has to change, right? It's just like Hangman now, he's not anxious. He's not worried about everything. He's not worried about who he is or what he represents for the fans and all that. No, now he's standing tall, he's confident, his back is straight, and he's not taking any guff. He's not taking any guff from anyone, not even MJF. But MJF is still the same guy that started, back in 2019 in AEW. He's still the same guy. He hasn't changed. And I think there's going to be a natural progression, if not for the sake of storytelling and the promotion, for the sake of MJF as a performer, as someone who does this for a creatively for a living. I think eventually he is going to grow out of the need to pay tribute to all of his heroes and really assume something that that will resonate with him, that will finally identify MJF as, well, this is the penultimate MJF form kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think a lot about him like long term as a like what does his long term career look like? And I've thought about this really since the beginning of when he was first, in AEW, and it was very clear he was going to be a long term main event player in this company. Where it's like, because he started, you know, really as like Cody's understudy and then doing the whole Cody angle.
Mm-hmm.
He to me was like I was like, this guy, he's starting so young and he's coming in as such a polished character in a way you really, really don't see guys that age be so ready to be a television character
Right.
in American wrestling. It just doesn't happen. Even guys who are really good right away as in-ring workers take a long time to develop the character. He right away was like that. And it's like, this is going to be fascinating to see this guy have a 25-year career because he's already like this kind of, in some ways, like already like close to like this peak version of a heel. Um, and I've always think like he's going to have to eventually turn babyface. He could be a really good babyface because he's so charismatic. But it's going to be odd And it's I think his first babyface run kind of reflected this sense of like, yeah, he's not really ready to be a babyface because he's such a natural heel. But how long can he be like the MJF character in AEW before he grows stale, before he gets needs a change? I in some ways, as bad as the babyface run had was, in kind of the fallout from that and the whole Adam Cole angle, as bad as that was, it did give him a chance to basically like relaunch himself as like
Hmm.
as this evil heel again, which I think he's been successful as. Um, but I do wonder about him long term. Like, what is MJF gonna be in 5 years if he's still in AEW? And like, is he gonna grow? Yeah, he's gonna probably grow stale because most wrestlers grow stale after 10 years in the same company. But it's what happens, especially because he is so young. He was so young when he came in. He was already so like kind of developed as a wrestler. Um, like what do you think his like long-term like outlook is going to be?
Um, Look, I legitimately believe that he loves AEW. I really do. I think I think he, like the tattoo, it's not a work. It's like it's something that he really believes in, and I think if it was his choice, he'd probably stay there for years. But like I said, he's a smart guy, and I think that eventually, um, it's always a good idea to go dip your toes in the water elsewhere and see how you can fare there. And sometimes you can return and achieve things again back in your home promotion or where you started or whatever that you didn't think were possible. The like I think it's inevitable at some point that he's going to go test the waters, and especially like elsewhere is what I'm trying to say. Especially if fans continue to have these very emotional gut first reactions to whatever he does and never let the the true creative kind of shine through, or walk the path with him to see, oh, okay, well, MJF's in this program again, let's see what's going to happen. um before that before that occurs, I do think he's going to have a babyface turn. I think eventually he will. I think right now he's I think right now he's in a spot where he's still an asshole. He still wants to be an asshole, and he still needs to be an asshole, especially when you have, a main event, a champion like Hangman, who is, white meat, pure, a good guy. You know, he's going to have to be the snake still for a while, and eventually, I think that eventually, when he figures out how to overcome Hangman clean, I think that might be a catalyst for slow. I'm not saying an instant turn because you just defeated Hangman Page, but the catalyst to change to something different that will eventually lead to a proper babyface run for him. If any of what I said just made sense, I kind of feel I was a little scattered there on that one.
That's okay, Warren. You've been talking because you people don't know this, Warren. You came right from your live stream to the show.
Right, right. But still, it's not an excuse. The people are listening, are joining the Gentleman's Wrestling podcast for insightful things, not just old man blabbering stuff. But it's like ultimately, I think he has a spot in AEW for as long as he wants. I think eventually he is going to go test waters elsewhere. And I think a
Which
babyface
would mean
run.
going to WWE, right?
Yes, 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 yes. I think he's going to go give it a try at some point. Like, you know how fast the business moves. Who is to say what's going to happen in 5 years, right? In 4 years, whenever his contract's coming up, right? And uh, you know, you never know what's going to happen. And but I think there is in AEW, I think there is a babyface turn that is going to happen again, and it's probably going to be a lot more. It's probably going to be a lot more focused than the Brochacho one, and will probably end up. I wouldn't be surprised if people ended up being really surprised at how good he is at it, because I thought he was pretty good at first when he did the babyface turn. I was a little surprised at it, but without with the difference here being not going into it in a reluctant manner, embracing the good side of himself. I think there's a lot of interesting things that can come out of there as well. Of course, the, we're going to have we'll definitely have conversations as to whether it was successful or not when it occurs. But I think I think that's part of the plan. I think ultimately that's something that he wants to do and that he will do. But right now, I think this company needs an asshole. I think this company needs a top heel, a tippy top heel. I think AEW fans have complicated relationships with their top heels. Look with
Why is that though?
John Moxley, right? John Moxley's
Why?
another good example.
Yeah.
Uh, Look, um, the I, I'm of a very popular opinion that the Death Rider stuff at first wasn't very good. It lacked focus. It was a little scattered. Didn't know exactly what story they were trying to tell. And then earlier this year, like in February, March, when they stopped trying to make the Death Riders like this group that is going to, you know, tear the soul out of AEW or whatever it was. I think when they flipped them to just being a unit of ass kickers, of really nasty, bad intended ass kickers, I think they became great. I think John Moxley then became much more focused. I think it all became much better, and he was a tremendous foil to Hangman leading into to the main event. Um, I don't know why AEW fans have such contentious relationships with their heels to the point that they start rejecting them as opposed to embracing the heel work. I really don't know. I wish I had the answer for you, Jesse. Maybe you do. Do you have the answer to that?
I mean, each person's circumstances are different. I think a lot of the issues with Moxley and the Death Riders was I think a lot of people had resentment for the match structure being, a bunch of guys interfere in a match. Like the most boring old hat kind of style booking. I also think just the whole feud with Copeland as the top babyface in the company, or at least the babyface that's challenging for the world title during a cycle, didn't help matters just because it just didn't feel like uh the company had so much promising young talent that needed to be featured, and instead we were getting Moxley, an established talent who's kind of already hit his ceiling along, and then Copeland, who's this old veteran that is on his last legs in a lot of ways. Um, so I think that set a bad precedent for the Death Riders. And I've been pretty consistent saying like the Death Riders got what they needed to be, which is they were Moxley was a good final boss for Hangman to slay
Mm-hmm.
and to win the world title. So that's basically my take on Death Riders. But it's interesting that it carries over to I think like fans having complicated relationships with, Chris Jericho, who's obviously a top heel for a long time in AEW, and the Death Riders and MJF and some of these other guys um, that have been in the mix. You could even say that there's some resentment towards Mercedes Moné from fans. Um, and I think all of them have their own kind of issues, but I do think getting to the point where it's like, I think fans because they're so emotionally invested in the success of AEW, like legitimately emotionally invested as in like we are counting on this company to like be this mainstream wrestling company that's not WWE, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the only company that has seems to have anywhere close to the financial resources to at least combat WWE on equal footing in a lot of ways. That the entire wrestling world is hinging on the success of AEW, and there's just all that emotion gets channeled into like just various different odd things, like all this fear and anxiety that pops up. And that's how you get people like being like, oh, like MJF is he's like an actual asshole and not just playing one on TV. Right?
Yeah.
The cat's sorry, the cat's doing a run-in, so the same noises.
Oh, that's fine. Run it. Cheers, cat. But yeah, I like. There's a fundamental anxiety that exists with AEW fans that I don't think it will ever shake until WWE is out of business, which is something that then will probably never happen. Um, you know, the everything always seems like it's teetering on the edge. That it's everything is on the verge of disaster.
Unnecessarily so.
Unnecessary, exactly, because we know things are much more secure. We're recording this on September 4th. You probably saw the bad rating that Dynamite had last night. Well, the the anxiety is out full force, and the defense brigade is out there, and it's like everyone needs to calm down and relax, and because like you said, AEW is such an financially secure position regardless, that these types of little bumps in the road, they're bound to happen, and they should not trigger these visceral responses that everything is going to hell, and there's it's just going to be an overall disaster. We can't keep going down that route. It's not healthy, and it's not healthy for the performers either, because look, to swing this back over to Max, I got to assume the guy is look, we know he's online, we know he reads the comments, we know he's sensitive to these things, let's put it that way. There's no way that at some point this doesn't affect you, right? There's no way that at some point this doesn't just come and get to you and ultimately affects how you're going to perform, or affects your decisions moving forward as to whether or not, oh, well, I'm going to, do I stay in this promotion, or do I go check out how things are elsewhere? Maybe, maybe I'll just be better elsewhere.
Sorry, I randomly just muted myself.
That's okay.
Apologies for any break there. You think if you were a wrestler, you would care like what like people like you and I would say about like your performances as a wrestler?
Yeah, I would. To be honest, yes, I would. I would, but I don't. I think it's a question of then how deep. You see now my dog is barking because my son's coming. There we go. There we go. Everything's all right. No, I probably wouldn't get really deep into the weeds and argue with people, or like do stuff like argue about star ratings and stuff like that, which I think as a wrestler is kind of cringe. But look, your job, what you do as a professional wrestler, right, is you get into a ring and you do things to get an instant reaction out of people.
Yes, so you're working to a live crowd.
Exactly. And you want the instant reaction, you want the instant gratification, you want to see how people are reacting to what you're doing, and you want that reaction. So you go on, I think it's a natural extension to go online, to go on, X, formerly Twitter or whatever, to see how people are reacting towards you, because it's an extension of that performance that you just put on, right? It's different from movies where you as a performer, you don't get that instant hit of adrenaline because the crowd loves your film and is enjoying what you're doing, because it's more of a passive form of entertainment. If you're a musician, well, you can get that with a live show. So it's closer to that. Um, so so the idea of going online, yeah, I understand. I'd do that. I'd go see what people are talking about. I'd do some vanity searching. I'd see what the trends are.
Yeah, I would think that too, but I think when you say like, oh, like if MJF is seeing a lot of the criticism he's seeing from like our corners of the internet, our circle, our shared
Mhm.
circles, as you say, Warren. Um, like if he's seeing that, I don't know if that would influence. I don't know. I don't want to. I don't want to assume anything about how these people who are on TV and are facing so much criticism all the time from various different people, many of people who are just clearly idiots. Um,
Mm.
like
Mm.
like if I would be influenced by them or not. I don't know. I would say like if you were to go on Twitter and you would see like who have the most followers and kind of the comments that those people are saying, which is what you would probably be most likely to see unless you were following very specific people. I would, you would see those people like JD from New York. Like I wouldn't, if I was a wrestler, I wouldn't care what that person is saying.
No, no,
I'd
I agree.
see, and that's what you would probably be most likely to see. Like if MJF is listening to this podcast and he's seeing two very intelligent gentlemen, bilingual gentlemen,
Yes.
discussing, his career in depth, maybe that's one thing because it's clear that we're putting a lot of care and thought into it. But I imagine your typical wrestler, your typical, any type of public figure is really just seeing what maybe a few loud voices are saying on social media. And I think it'd be very easy as a wrestler to be like, all these people are just marks that don't understand the business.
Sure.
That's what I would be more likely to think than necessarily be like, oh, like this is what the real like the 1% super hardcore smart pundit section of the internet is saying. Um, I think you'd have to be pretty deep into it to figure that out. And maybe MJF is. Maybe he's listening to this podcast. I always operate a little bit under the assumption that the subjects I'm talking about on this podcast might be listening to it. I know
Oh,
that's unlikely to
y-
be true, but that's the journalist in me is to assume that the subject you are writing about is going to read your story.
oh, you can never doubt who's listening ever, ever, ever. I've learned that. So you should always assume that they are listening.
Yeah, if I ever
I
say anything on this
really do believe
podcast,
that.
it's because in some part of me, wants the person who I'm addressing to hear it.
Sure. And you would probably say the same thing to their face, which is maybe what some people don't necessarily do. Anyway. Um but look, I see where you're going with this, and I understand. Look, it goes back to the idea of right at the start of the podcast when we were talking about the O2, and you said, well, 19,000 people in the O2 like the angle clearly, and if there's 1,200 people online who are gritting their teeth and going boo hiss, uh, who do you listen to? Who are you listening to? And but which voices are louder ultimately? There's also that. Are the 1,200 people just like, spamming your notifications with garbage and hate and whatnot, whereas the 19,000 people cheered and loved it and appreciated your job for putting the champion over, but then they all went home and you don't hear about those again. All you get online is this fucking sucked. MJF is awful. He's the worst thing ever. So I can understand that, you go online to get some gratification and then you run into that. It's a tricky balance. I don't know how MJF deals with that. I don't know how I would deal with that specifically, but I know I would look online. I know I would absolutely be searching for myself online and seeing how things go.
Be in the Voice of Wrestling Discord, like just like seeing vanity searching your name.
And nothing but good, right?
For you, Mr. Warren Hayes, maybe that's true.
No, nothing but good stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah. I would recommend not doing that, Warren. There's a lot of negative things about you on Discord.
Of
Um,
course.
anyway, I think this discussion has run its course. Do you have anything you want to plug, sir?
The Mr. Warren Hayes Show is a thing that I do. I do a podcast every week that is available on YouTube at youtube.com/Mr. Warren Hayes or on your favorite podcast application of choice. I also stream on the YouTube channel a couple of nights a week. So that's always fun. And we have a nice little community over there and it's a good time. We'd love to have you pop in if you can. I also do a Dynamite review every week on Thursday. Available as a podcast as well on anywhere you want to listen to that. So subscribe, follow, find me. You can also follow me on the Blue Sky at mrwarrenhayes.show. And it's always a pleasure to get the invitation to come to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast, Jesse. I love the opportunity to chat pro wrestling, talk ball with you. It's always a great time. I appreciate it, man. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, and you were really like a blue sky early adopter in terms of the wrestling space.
Yes, I was there early on. Correct. I gave a lot of invitations to a lot of the Val guys.
How would you describe your like experience as a blue sky wrestling guy?
Uh, I enjoy it because a lot of people on surface level seem to agree with a lot of my wrestling takes. So I would say it's excellent. But if you're going in there to be to have different visions of pro wrestling that may skew away from things that are AEW centric, or maybe more towards WWE, or that skew maybe on the away from the left side of the political spectrum, it's not for you. It's just not for you.
Yeah, I mean,
But I enjoy it overall.
I enjoy it. I think it's a good spot for me in terms of like the audience that I'm speaking to.
Yes.
If you wanted to reach more people, it's still better to be on Twitter, but just the quality of interaction of the average person that you're interacting with on wrestling Twitter is so low. And on Blue Sky, it's far fewer people, but at the same time, it's the average person is much more likely to actually engage you in like a real conversation as opposed to like a quick reaction
Correct.
on
Yes.
Twitter. I'm not on Twitter anymore. I think the only time I ever really see anything is if there's a link to something on Twitter and I'll click on the link.
Yep.
And I'll
Same.
just like see like the replies and they're just like so bad. And I do think to myself, wow, this was like something I actually engaged in. Like what a waste of my life.
It's garbage. Like the
And I know it's worse
replies on
now
stuff
than
are
it
just
used to
junk.
be. Yeah, I knew it. I knew it. It's worse now than it used to be. Like, yeah, like the replies. Like, I would have taken it just for people threatening to kill, telling me to kill myself, for a bad, anti WWE take. I prefer those people over the people that are just trying to tell me about crypto. That's what I
That's
see now. I see like
yeah.
you'll get like you'll see like it'll be like a popular, um like tweet and you'll see like in the comment section there's like 50 blue check marks which are at the top of the page and they're all like just talking about some meme coin like I'm just looking at blah 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 coin keep rising and like the next one I can't believe just seeing it go up and up and I
And
was like, oh, this is just what this is what Twitter has become.
and scrolling through replies is it's become really tedious too, because now you get suggested tweets. Like as you're going through the replies, you get suggested tweets
Yeah,
like
and they're never from anyone interesting.
no, they're and it breaks the flow, and you're like, why is this person saying something? Oh, it's not, this person is not replying. This is something completely different that I should be interested in, but I really am not.
Yeah.
It's a terrible, terrible website now. It's awful.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Warren. I appreciate you for being on the show. I want to thank all my listeners, and I'll talk to everyone again after a while. Okay, bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Andrew Rich, And if you're like me, you look at the state of modern wrestling discourse and think, wow, what a cesspool. That's why I'm here to tell you about Music of the Mat Remix. That's right, your favorite wrestling music podcast is back with a new format, where I bring on a guest and we play songs related to wrestling-themed topics. It could be a wrestling reference, a wrestling concept, a wrestling pun, things of that nature. Now you might be saying, Andrew, that is a very, very tenuous connection to pro wrestling on a wrestling podcast network. Is this just an excuse to hang out with your friends and talk about music and ignore the rest of the wrestling landscape? Yes. Yes, it is. So listen to Music of the Mat Remix on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, available on Apple, Spotify, or your podcast player of choice.
Hey kids, Jeff Hawkins from Shake Them Ropes here, and for almost 15 years we have been part of Voices of Wrestling. Myself and Chris Novembrino give a review of that week's news, the lazy river of wrestling criticism of that week's WWE and AEW, and then Vader Club, where we watch something from one of our past, or something we may have missed. Smart, snarky, and sometimes serious, but not always. That's us, and if that's your vibe, we'd love to have you listen to Shake Them Ropes every week on the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network.